Come on in, welcome to Idled Out, where we talk all things Survivor. My name is Luke, and today we're talking about everyone's favorite thing, live tribals. A live tribal on Survivor is when, at some point during Tribal Council, a word is said or a glance is given that causes absolute pandemonium to break out. At that point, the survivors say, "Fuck it, we're doing it live." Characterized by lots of unsubtitled whispering, everyone getting up out of their seats and moving around the Tribal Council set, and a gleeful look spread across Jeff's dimpled face, live tribals are pretty controversial in the Survivor fandom, with many enjoying the chaos they bring and many more finding them to be quite annoying, especially when we're rounding our third or fourth live tribal of the season. Whatever your thoughts on them, they're quintessential Big Moves era Survivor that has given us some of our most iconic tribal councils in recent years, and some of our least iconic, but mostly iconic. So today I thought it would be fun to go through the history of live tribals, from Survivor's very first live tribal in Season 4, to the proto-live tribals of the 20s, to their official birth in Survivor Game Changers at a tribal council I'm still mad about, all the way through to the present. All that said, let's take a look at the history of live tribals on Survivor, from the truly iconic to the completely pointless. Live tribals are a hallmark of the Big Moves era, but one could argue that the very first live tribal, where Tribal Council truly was up in the air, plans were thrown out and anyone could go, was the Final Four vote in Survivor Marquesas. Sure, there's no one getting up out of their seat and whispering to someone else, but this was a chaotic Tribal Council for the early years, even though everyone is calmly sitting and politely waiting their turn to speak. At the Final Four, Nalia, Kathy, and Paschal have all agreed to vote out Vecepia. They just have to beat her at immunity. In the early days, the Final Four immunity challenge was a trivia contest at Tribal Council. Yeah, they just gotta beat V and, Nalia and Paschal are an inseparable pair who will never vote against each other. So, with Vecepia immune, Kathy is now in the hot seat and makes a live plea to V to force a tie, kicking off what I think is the first live tribal council, in the sense that plans were thrown out and anyone could go home, ever. I mean, Kathy even asks Jeff if she can whisper her plans to V so the jury can't hear her, an idea which Jeff angrily shoots down. Clearly, his position on whispering will change in the future. The tie is forced, Paschal goes out in a random rock draw, and although this is a far cry from live tribals as we know them, it's definitely worth noting as the first real tribal council where anything could happen. It was absolute, utter chaos. Throughout the next 20-odd seasons, Tribal Council was generally what you'd expect. Of course, there were loads of exciting blindsides, but things generally weren't live, although there were some close calls. I think you can trace the genesis of live tribals as we know them today to two tribal councils in Survivor's mid-20s. The first would be the Final 10 vote in Survivor Philippines, Survivor's 25th season. This was a vote with a ticking clock. Everyone wanted Penner out, but he won immunity, forcing a late afternoon scramble. There are like 4 different plans going on, one of which is Malcolm. So at Tribal, he pulls out his idol and bluffs that he's going to play it, which prompts Abby to also pull out her idol, even though, Abby, you're like the literal one name that hasn't been thrown out this episode. The idea of causing chaos as late as possible to get the target off your back was a strategy Malcolm intentionally wanted to use heading into his first 2 seasons, and you can see it play out to perfection here as Tribal Council descends into chaos, with the vote ultimately landing on Jeff Kent. Hey, look on the bright side, buddy. That's less winnings you have to pay taxes on. Malcolm again pioneered the as late as possible chaotic tribal strategy in the very next season, Survivor Caramoan. I think we were this close to getting the birth of real live tribals as we know them today in this season. At Final 10, the majority Stealth R Us Alliance wants to pick off the 3 amigos, Malcolm, Reynold, and Eddie. This should have been a slam dunk for Stealth R Us. They've got the numbers to split votes, but the perfect storm of Malcolm having an an idol, Reynold winning immunity, and then Malcolm finding another idol upsets their plans. At Tribal, Malcolm pulls out one idol for himself, then a nice little treat for Eddie, sending the Majority Alliance into a panic. Survivor's first real Whisper Fest, as the members of Stealth R Us scramble to ensure their own safety. Jeff is about to piddle with excitement. An underdog alliance of 3 handsome men whipping out their idols and sending a largely unlikable Majority Alliance into a tailspin is the kind of move Probstian dreams are made of. If Malcolm had just stayed put and said nothing, I'm certain this would have been our first fully live Tribal with people getting up out of their seats. I don't want to backseat drive Malcolm's game too much. He found that second idol like 10 seconds before Tribal Council and didn't have time to cook up a plan. But he does overplay his hand here by announcing that his alliance will all be voting for Philip, giving some of the more skittish members of Stealth R Us a blanket assurance that it wasn't their neck in the guillotine. Now I get it, Philip is annoying, but if Malcolm let the paranoia play out a bit longer, names would have been publicly thrown out, fracturing Stealth R Us forever. Still, a pretty cool move, and a Tribal that loomed large in players' minds for years, inspiring many similar Tribal Council revelations in the next half-dozen seasons. However, everything changed in Season 34, Survivor Game Changers, and ironically, the man who laid the groundwork for live Tribals to exist would ultimately be undone by one. Poetic, isn't it? In Episode 3 of Survivor Game Changers, the live Tribal is truly born. Yet another reason to love this truly, truly great season of Survivor. Yep, just a great old season of Survivor with an awesome boot order and super cool things happening at Tribal Council all the time. Just the best. To set the stage, the post-swap Mana and Nuku tribes both lose immunity, and will attend Survivor's first joint Tribal Council together, meaning both tribes will vote as one and eliminate one person. Post-swap Nuku has 6 members to Mana's 5, and is about as stacked as you can get on a returnee season. It includes most of the actual Game Changers on this Game Changer season. Sandra, Malcolm, Michaela, Aubrey, JT, Varner? Well, no tribe's perfect. Post-swap Mana, on the other hand, is not as full of heavy hitters. It's a who's who of literal who's. I cannot underscore how much literally all people in the world were rooting for Nuku to come out ahead at this Tribal Council. I don't even think Monica Culpepper sitting at home wanted Mana to win this showdown. At Tribal, JT is torn. He got swap screwed a bit here. He's the only original Nuku member on New Nuku, and could either move forward with his new tribe and new allies Malcolm and Aubrey, or vote with Culpepper and company and take out who he believes is their target, Sandra. But JT's gonna JT. JT pops up to whisper to Culpepper to play the idol on Sierra, trying to have his cake and eat it too by flushing the other tribe's idol and idling out Sandra, his biggest threat, all in one fell swoop. It's right here that live Tribals are born. The thing about JT is, on his returning seasons, he plays Survivor like he's playing with house money. JT's games get worse every time he plays, but they get more fun to watch. He takes the biggest, boldest swings imaginable, moves that would be genius if they did work, but they never work. Here he wanted to idle out Sandra without getting any blood on his hands, but his Culpepper pep talk sends Tribal into chaos. Everyone starts whispering in everyone else's ears, alliances jump up for huddles, and Jeff is over there grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. Unfortunately for JT, his plan completely backfires in his face. Brad and Sierra's alliance don't vote out Sandra, they vote out JT's closest ally Malcolm instead, a move which he probably should have seen coming, since Malcolm is the biggest physical threat on this tribe. JT, of course, is voted out the next episode. Oh, don't feel bad, Malcolm. Every 3-time player is allowed 1 embarrassingly early exit. Heck, sometimes they even have 3. Even though we lost one of the only actual All-Stars on this All-Star season here, I gotta admit this was great TV. So much so that it kicked off Survivor's own mini live Tribal Council era, which even continued later through this season at both the Sandra boot and the Michaela boot. I think there was a bit of a learning curve on the show's part on how to present these, leading to a bitter taste in some fans' mouths right out of the gate that never quite washed out. The whispering was initially mostly unsubtitled, leading to confusion on the audience's behalf about who was going home and why, making some of the live tribals exciting but unsatisfying, because we were left in the dark about what was actually happening. You still can't tell me how and why Michaela was voted out of Game Changers, because the entire decision happened in whispers we couldn't hear. Still, with the Band-Aid ripped off, players in future seasons would get out of their seats, whisper in each other's ears, and call alliance huddles, all while Jeff excitedly looked on. Despite the initial live tribal oversaturation, this wasn't so bad to start. We get a pretty good one on the very next season in Survivor Triple H, when an increasingly petty argument between Ben and Lauren, combined with Mike throwing Lauren's idol into the fire, prompts Devin to pull a JT and go talk to Dr. Mike about making a house call on Ben, who plays his idol and sends Lauren home. This is good. I have no problem with this live tribal because it was exciting and I could tell what was happening. But we already hit "this is pointless" territory in Season 36's first tribal, which you literally forgot was a live tribal. Okay, so it wasn't actually live because no one's vote was ever changing, but at this tribal council, Gonzalez makes a last-ditch effort to save herself by hopping around the tribal council set, whispering in any ear that will listen.
First tribal.
Throwing it down. This is gonna be a crazy season.
No, it won't. Jeff states out loud his philosophy on live tribals here, saying that this is their tribal council, so up until he says it's time to vote, anything goes. I'm going to hesitantly say that I personally like this approach, and I'm willing to put up with the pointless live tribals if it means we also get the great live tribals too. Look, if I have to listen to JD trying to start a live tribal for no reason, or Missy doing her best Michaela impression to get amazing tribal councils like the Natalia boot or the Julia boot, so be it. Speaking of the Julia boot, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the greatest live tribal of all time. You know when you're heading to Tribal Council at the 25-minute mark, things are gonna be good. The temperature on the tribal slowly rises as Rick throws out a plan for all of Lesu plus Ron and Julie to take control of the game. And Julia understandably begins panicking because that's a pretty good idea for all parties involved. Once this tribal goes live, it is great. In fact, this tribal is so good that it single-handedly bumps up this season in my ranking by like 5 or 6 positions. Julia calling Rick a passenger only to get her comeuppance in the end, a brief reunion between best frenemies Wentworth and David where they admit to targeting each other, Ron pitching a Victoria vote while Victoria's right there, Aubrey having Eliza tier reactions, Aurora calling Julie a soccer mom, and Julie's iconic "I'm jumping ship" line. This is the only tribal council, to my knowledge, that literally fades to commercial and comes back to continued tribal council conversations. In the end, everyone ultimately agrees on Julia, a satisfying boot for what is undeniably a top 10 tribal council ever. There are 2 other live tribals of note in the late 30s that I'd like to touch on that are both enjoyable but exemplify why some fans don't care for live tribals. At the first vote after the swap in Survivor David vs. Goliath, Alex starts a live tribal by flipping on the Goliath majority he swapped in with to vote out Natalia. A very bold move considering this tribe was going to be receiving Carl after the vote. Of course, this worked out for Alec, and I love him for it, but it is a borderline reckless play that is just a big move for big move's sake. Similarly, in Survivor Island of the Idols, Nora single-handedly blows up Tribal at Final 8. Although, look, like most things in life, this is actually Dean's fault. The players on the bottom, Elaine, Karishma, Nora, and Dean, were planning a coup against Tommy, which would actually shake up this season in an interesting way. But just like every other time this season threatened to get good, it zigs instead of zags. At Tribal, Detective Dean narcs on this plan to Tommy, leading to Nora exposing Dean, the Minority Alliance, and Elaine's idol all in one fell swoop. And despite all this, the majority just sticks with their original boring plan of voting off Karishma. Even Boston Rob is annoyed from the gallery. All of this theater just to pick off the obvious target. Stupid season. Be more entertaining. While hardly anyone liked the amount of live tribals in Game Changers, I think most fans were receptive to the once-a-season live tribals in subsequent years. The Ben Bomb in Triple H, Gonzalez's attempted live tribal in Ghost Island, Alec blindsiding Natalia in David vs. Goliath, the I'm Jumping Ship tribal in Edge of Extinction, Nora blowing tribal up in Island of the Idols. Outside of Ghost Island, these are all great tribal councils. But we reach peak live tribal saturation in Survivor Winners at War. You could argue that like 3 or 4 tribal councils this season were live tribals. The Adam boot, the second Tyson boot, the Kim boot. This was 3 live tribals in a 4-episode span, and I think this was the breaking point for many fans when it comes to live tribals. I think most of us would agree that live tribals are like candy. They're good in moderation, and too much at once makes for a pretty unpleasant experience. Perhaps the era of live tribals is come and gone though. We didn't have anyone get up out of their seat to whisper in someone else's ears all through Survivor 42. Maybe live tribals are done. And who might we have to thank for that? Could it be courtesy of Heather's last-minute live tribal in Survivor 41? Literally, Jeff is sending Ricard up to vote when Heather initiates a live tribal in Episode 8, randomly pitching a Nasir boot out of nowhere to anyone who will listen, and almost getting herself voted out in the process. Could this be a 10,000 IQ #girlboss move from our manipulative, chaotic purple superfan queen to create a live tribal so pointless that it would ruin the very idea of live tribals for players for years to come? A Machiavellian move from a massive Survivor superfan who hates live tribals so much that she creates one to destroy them forever? Who's to say? Got nothing else for ya. Don't go jumping ship like Julie. Like and subscribe, and I'll get you more Survivor content just like this. Until next time, don't get idled out.